Tim McMahon and Adrian Wojnarowski report that Quin Snyder's future with the Utah Jazz, excuse me, that's terrible podcasting. It indeed remains uncertain, though. Quin Snyder's future with the Utah Jazz. He has 2 years left on his contract, a 2023-2024 option that is his. So he effectively has 1 year left on his deal. The Jazz are willing to let him coach that out. They're also willing to extend him. It does also sound like, though, per the reporting from Woj and McMahon, that Snyder, who's recovering from hip surgery since the Jazz lost in the playoffs to the Dallas Mavericks, is also willing to walk away and then not coach for a year. He did not express any interest reportedly in pursuing any of the open jobs. And currently there's only one right now in Charlotte. I do wonder if other teams might be foaming at the mouth should he decide to leave the Jazz. Maybe that's something that happens in the middle of the season. Who knows? But the only vacancy right now is in Charlotte. He doesn't appear to be interested. Things seem to be deteriorating in Utah, though. This does not get out unless they're on the in the red zone of Quin Snyder leaving. To me, the stuff like this just doesn't get out like that. We had Jake Fisher from Bleacher Report on this podcast earlier in the year, and he mentioned that there was already a ton of rumblings about Quin Snyder's future in Utah. Woj and McMahon mentioned philosophical differences. It's not clear publicly what those are. Is it, the new regime under Ryan Smith? Is it the fact that the organization seems to be extremely worried about Donovan Mitchell, and I think has acted in certain ways as if they need to placate him behind the scenes through no fault of Donovan Mitchell's own? I just want to make clear, he doesn't seem like this super high maintenance superstar from what we can tell, what I know. That's just to throw that out there without misconceptions. Maybe Quin Snyder's frustrated that they didn't really double down this year and didn't treat themselves like a contender. Maybe everything's not copacetic with Danny Ainge being there as the CEO. There's also just been a lot of turnover when it comes to upstairs, the suits, whatever you want to call them. And so that, this is like no longer the regime necessarily that Snyder was brought in by any means. I don't know where the Jazz would go from here if you lose Quin Snyder. There's no one on the market that's comparable. I do wonder if he leaves, does it make it more likely that you consider this not a rebuild? Because I really don't think you're trading Donovan Mitchell with that many guaranteed years left on his, post rookie scale extension. He is under contract for another 4 years, the fourth of which is a player option. So 3 guaranteed years. It would be the Rudy Gobert things. He is 4 years, including a player option valued at about $170 million left on his deal. Jake Fisher reported that there's growing rumblings around the league that Utah doesn't know which way it's going to lean with Rudy Gobert. I think their inherent issue there is you can't trade Rudy Gobert and get better. His salary is so large. He is such a transcendent defender, but his salary is so large that this isn't something that you can flip Rudy Gobert and then maybe turn him into 2 or 3 players who elevate your team. Because one, you're losing such a good player, but I do think that teams are going to view that contract as prohibitive. This is tangentially linked to the other main news talking point, Jake Fisher reporting that OG Anunoby grew dissatisfied with his role in Toronto this season. I did see a tweet on Twitter. I apologize that I can't even cite it properly, but that OG's touches were sort of diminished as more of the offense was turned over, not just to Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam, but also Scotty Barnes. That's left some haziness looking forward as to what his role will be like. Clearly, he might fancy himself someone who is more of an on-ball creator. The numbers do not back that up. We've seen promise. We've talked about it on the pod, not so much this year. He can hit sort of the methodical pull-up jumpers. We've seen him do more than attack on straight line drives, but just as a passer, even varying up his handle a little bit more, there needs to be demonstrative leaps there. And even then, is he someone who's going to be able to face up and hit just these, isolation jumpers consistently? I don't know. And does he fancy himself that type of player? I really, push comes to shove, even if you think maybe he's close to that, I would just question the playmaking. What is his turnover rate going to be in those situations as well? Still, Toronto's been mentioned as a Rudy Gobert destination. I just want to make it clear, I fucking hate that fit. It's grotesque in my mind. I'm sorry. They'd figure it out and they'd be great defensively. I don't want to watch that offense. Toronto's apparently not willing to give up Siakam in that deal because they value him more than Rudy Gobert, as they absolutely positively should. But you can't match money unless you're going to give up OG, and then it would have to be Gary Trent in all likelihood, because you're not going to trade Fred Van Fleet or Scotty Barnes for that matter and step ladder your way there, which is why I would rule Toronto out basically from that. But you almost have to command that type of haul. And so unless there's a team with like bad money or unwanted money on the books, or not even bad money, but just these larger contracts that aren't instrumental to the team's future, Charlotte would be a perfect example here. Atlanta comes closest to, I think, straddling both sides of the fence where it's like, okay, he's an upgrade from Clint Capella. Do you attach DeAndre Hunter? Is there picks involved there? There would have to be more money involved as well, but they have Bogdan Bogdanovic. They have Danilo Gallinari's. He's partially guaranteed salary for next season if they wanted to guarantee that and move it, since the math with Utah would be weird leading into the draft since they do not have cap space. There's a workable situation there when you're looking at just the other contracts that they have on the books. That still, though, if you're the Jazz and you're turning Rudy Gobert into Clint Capella, DeAndre Hunter, and is it Kevin Huerter? And it's just one more guy, and that guy's not going to be John Collins. And if it was, I'd question why Atlanta was giving up so much. That's not really inspiring. And so if Quin Snyder, at least if he's around, you can talk yourself into, well, if we run this back, what if we try and get in on the sweepstakes for OG Anunoby ourselves or Jeremy Grant? They can trade first round picks in the, I don't want to say the not too distant future, but just the very distant future. In 2026 would be the first allowable one, technically, pending an obligation to OKC in 2024. And then they could also include a 2028 pick. Franchises, front offices, they don't have the job stability to necessarily value those picks all that much, which is why probably the Lakers, it's why the Lakers 2027 and 2029 first round picks aren't being talked about as these massively valuable trade chips. That being said, Utah does have Royce O'Neal, who, look, he dropped off defensively this year, but he was responsible for so much, especially the past few years, and I think he's overtaxed. You can't have him be your best perimeter defender. He's just not big enough to hold up to the workload that Utah has assigned to him over the years. He would still be really valuable on pretty much every single team in the NBA. So you have him. There's probably teams that might be interested in Mike Conley. You can make more. The names, I think they're out there. It's if the Kings decide to trade Harrison Barnes, which I don't expect them to. There's Jeremy Grant in Detroit. And there's, I guess, OG Anunoby now in Toronto, if people think he's up for grabs. Who knows what Washington does? KCP and Kyle Kuzma are sitting there. Those are lower end options. Kenrich Williams and OKC, another lower end options. But you can explore buy now moves with the Jazz's roster. It's just harder because of their limited draft pick cachet. You have to be willing to put those distant picks on the table, number one, and then have teams willing to value them. But if you want to make more of an all-in play, it's not outside the realm of possibility. It's more likely the Jazz can do that than the Lakers, for instance. So you have to consider that. And if Quin Snyder's there, it's easier to talk yourself into that. If you're beginning with a blank slate, a new coach, is it Kenny Atkinson? Is it Mike D'Antoni? It seems like one of them is going to get the Charlotte job. Please, for the love of God, do not bring Mark Jackson into Utah. I don't know that I can't handle that. I know people want him off ESPN, but my mind can't handle that. My guess would be, and this is just my guess, I don't think Quin Snyder's going to be coaching the Jazz next season. It just feels like he's gone, the fact that this released. And hopefully you're not listening to this podcast and this news has become dated. So that's the status in Utah. And if he leaves, I don't think everything's on the table, but their offseason gets infinitely more interesting, not because they're just searching for another coach, but because of what I would wonder what it means for the direction of the team. Are they trying to, again, build on top of what they already have, or would there be more of a wholesale shift to where everybody but Donovan Mitchell would be on the table? I don't know what the right course of action is. If I'm the Jazz, let's just be realistic. I know fans of other teams want them to trade everybody, and this core does feel stale. If I'm the Jazz, I'm putting every fucking pick on the table, and I'm trying to go after to get that wing to continue floating this core. The trade market is going to dictate a lot of that. I don't know. Let's use Jeremy Grant as an example. I don't think they would have the best offer available for him. That's just my guess. But there might be other mechanisms through which they can acquire wing. Maybe it's just more of a double rather than a triple or a home run. There are always names that will become available, at the last minute or over the offseason that we haven't been talking about. Maybe just Atlanta, full stop. DeAndre Hunter's extension eligible. They weren't sold on his lack of progress this year. Maybe they're just willing to move him. Like if you can put together a package for that. So there are just different things that you can try. Maybe if shit goes sideways in Chicago with Zach LaVine's free agency, like is Alex Caruso all of a sudden available? Probably not a big enough wing for them to really look at. What about Cleveland? Are they willing to cut bait with Isaac Okoro a little bit earlier? I don't necessarily love that fit just because he's better off. He seems like guarding smaller wingish type swingmen, and it feels like he's really most valuable as like an off-ball guy. And look, in free agency, maybe you get a Juan Toscano-Anderson. That's not the ceiling on who you could get if you're willing to use the entire taxpayer mid-level exception, but like that's among the best that you could potentially hope for. That still makes you better, though, is my point. So if I'm the Jazz, I don't know what they're going to do. I would double down because windows are just so fickle. And I know the West is going to be tougher and the trade market needs to allow it. So it's easy for me to sit here and say that. I don't know who's going to necessarily become available this summer that we just haven't already mentioned in passing. But like, those are the things that you really need to, you really need to consider, because a wholesale shift in the form of removing Rudy Gobert is going to make you worse. And so you're almost committing to a quasi rebuild at that point. Is it as simple as just like, let's just give Royce O'Neal help? What does it cost to get Josh Richardson out of San Antonio right now? 1 year, $12.2 million left on his deal. That name has become taboo, it feels like, and he was just quietly solid last year in Boston, but also really he was fine in San Antonio as well. So keep an eye on the Jazz. My guess is Quin Snyder isn't there. If I had to bet, let's assume Quin Snyder leaves. I'm going to say Rudy Gobert gets traded. If he stays, Rudy Gobert does not. But the Jazz are going to be a fascinating watch.